Back then, when I turned on the TV and happened to stumble upon Lost in Space, I was immediately pulled in. An American family lost in space, yet still together. A loud robot that was always issuing warnings. A man with a constant grimace, both annoying and funny at the same time. Everything felt like a safe adventure classic old American television. No matter how far they drifted, you trusted that in the next episode things would be okay. But as I grew older and watched it more closely, that sense of reassurance began to crack. Did you know that the original pilot episode of Lost in Space had no humour at all, and that the character, Dr. Smith, was supposed to die in the opening episode? Or that the actor inside the robot suit once collapsed under a costume weighing nearly 20 kilograms, narrowly escaping death from heat shock? Or that the complete proper ending, where the Robinson family actually returns to Earth, was filmed and then locked away because the network didn't dare air it? Today, we're going to open up 12 dark corners behind the scenes, the decisions made in boardrooms, and the ending that Lost in Space never wanted you to see. 12. Lost in Space was never just a silly family show. In our memory, Lost in Space exists as something easy and undemanding. A silly family show floating somewhere between idle afternoons and moments of mindless channel surfing. Life or death threats in space are turned into harmless farce. Characters shout, betray one another, and make constant mistakes. Yet no one truly pays the price, and everything is always resolved with a laugh. That very ease concealed an uncomfortable truth. This was not the show Lost in Space was meant to become. At the beginning, it was conceived as serious science fiction, cold tense and genuinely threatening. Not a fairy tale set in outer space, but a slice of very human fear, being lost, being betrayed, and the idea that a single mistake from within could be enough to bring down a system that seemed solid and secure. Danger in Lost in Space was not softened to reassure the audience. It existed as something uncontrollable. Then the show was hijacked mid-season. After exactly 13 episodes, the network forced a complete creative overhaul. The order was clear and unmistakable. It had to be lighter, funnier, easier to watch. Everything that made the show uncomfortable, everything that also made it memorable, was stripped away piece by piece. From that point on, Lost in Space was no longer allowed to be itself. It continued under the same name with the same familiar faces, but it was telling a different story. And that's why, looking back, we always feel as though we watched two different shows. The same title, the same cast, but a soul that had been swapped out very early on. 11. Lost in Space was created to beat Star Trek. There's something very few people know or have ever heard told correctly. Lost in Space was not a follower of Star Trek. It wasn't a copy nor an apprentice work. In reality, the two shows were developed in parallel, aiming for the same fall season in 1965, the same primetime slot, and the same audience that was just beginning to wonder about humanity's future beyond Earth. For Irwin Allen, this wasn't merely a creative project. It was a race. A very Hollywood kind of race, where the winner didn't need to be better, only earlier. Whoever aired first would shape the memory. Whoever claimed prime time would claim the audience. The rest would have to live in that shadow. Allen's strategy was brutally simple air first at all costs. He pushed the production team, shortened preparation time, and accepted risks that television normally wouldn't dare take. Everything was accelerated, not for perfection, but for timing. The result was that Lost in Space premiered on September 15, 1965, exactly 2 weeks before Star Trek. A gap that seems small, but in television, it's a lifetime. And in the first season, Allen won. Lost in Space became a major hit. Star Trek struggled with ratings. At that moment, the message was clear. Science fiction didn't need heavy philosophy or academic debate. All it needed was an American family and adventure, and the comforting sense that the future was still under control, and that was enough to dominate prime time. 10. The Robinson family, America's ideal Cold War model. Back then, What made Lost in Space easy to watch wasn't the robot nor the distant planets. What reassured us was the Robinson family. As long as they were standing together in the frame, we knew everything would be okay. But the more we look back, the clearer it becomes. The Robinsons were never just likeable main characters. They were a statement. The father, a scientist, a leader, rational, always making the final decision. The mother, gentle, moral, holding the family together in the midst of crisis. The children, curious, brave, representing the future. This was the model nuclear family of Cold War America, transported intact into outer space. And space in Lost in Space wasn't just a setting. It was the new frontier, the cosmic version of the Wild West. A place for America to continue doing what it knew best, moving outward, carrying order values, and the belief that it was doing the right thing. Lost in Space then wasn't overt propaganda. It was soft propaganda. No slogans, no speeches, just the image of an American family functioning smoothly even as the world around them collapses. That's why every threat in the show carries special meaning. Danger doesn't come only from outer space, but from anything that disrupts that structure, chaos, betrayal, and especially those who are inside but don't truly belong. Looking back, we can see it clearly. Lost in Space wasn't just telling a story about being lost in the universe. It was telling the deeper fear of an America afraid that with just one crack from within its entire idealized system could drift away with no way home. 9. The real ending was filmed and then locked away. Do you remember how Lost in Space ended? If you do, what you remember is probably a feeling of suspension. The Robinson family still lost, the ship still drifting, everything stopping as if the story were merely on pause, waiting to continue someday. That hazy memory isn't accidental. It was created. The truth is that Lost in Space once had a much clearer ending. An ending in the classic style of old television. The Robinson family finally finds its way back to Earth, reunites, after years lost in space, and at last closes a journey that had seemed endless. But that ending never aired. When CBS reviewed the completed cut, they made a very television decision to shelve it. Not because it was bad, not because it was controversial, but because it was too complete. An ending that closes every door is dangerous for a network. They wanted to preserve the possibility of reviving the series if circumstances changed. They wanted to keep Lost in Space in a state of not quite finished. Irwin Allen objected. He believed the audience deserved to see where this journey truly led. But the decision wasn't his to make, and so the ending. The very thing that should have released the story was locked away for decades. To this day, the complete ending has never been officially released. Only a few fragments surfaced years later in documentaries. The rest vanished like the sense of closure the show was never allowed to give its viewers. 8. Dr. Smith, the saboteur from within. Back then, when I watched the Lost in Space, I always thought Dr. Smith was a joke, a coward, a villain meant to be laughed at. But that was the distorted version. The original Smith was far more frightening. Smith wasn't an alien monster. He didn't come from some distant planet. He came from inside the system. A saboteur who spoke the same language, carried the same credentials, and stood right in the middle of the ideal family. And that's exactly why he was dangerous. Smith was a perfect embodiment of Cold War paranoia, the spy, the traitor, the man with a familiar face and hollow loyalty. Originally, Smith was written to die. Jonathan Harris was hired for a single episode. His role ended when the Jupiter 2 lifted off the saboteur removed order restored. But Harris saw something the script hadn't fully explored, yet a villain who survives doesn't just create danger, he corrodes from within. Harris convinced Irwin Allen to keep Smith, not to generate laughs, but to sustain tension. A threat that couldn't be expelled. At that point, Smith wasn't comic relief. He was a reminder that all it takes is one person inside, but not belonging to send an entire system drifting off course. Only later, when the network noticed the laughs, was Smith reshaped into a joke. But his origin, the fear of betrayal from within, was never accidental. 7. The actor inside the robot nearly died of heat stroke. If you strip away the metallic voice, the robot in Lost in Space is actually very quiet. It stands there, raises its arms, issues a warning, then freezes. In the audience's memory, it's just a stiff, lifeless block of metal without emotion. But behind that shell was a real human body breathing, enduring and slowly breaking down. Bob May was the man inside the robot suit. No facial acting, no recognition. Just a shadow trapped in nearly 18 kilograms of metal with no ventilation at all. Under the studio lights, temperatures inside the suit rose above 83 degrees C. Every take was an ordeal. Every passing minute was a fight against his own body. Bob May could endure only about 20 to 30 minutes before the suit had to come off. But television doesn't always wait. During one long shooting day in the second season, he collapsed inside the suit, falling to the ground with no visible face. It took time for the crew to remove the metal shell. When they finally got him out, Bob May was severely exhausted and had to be hospitalized for heat stroke and dehydration. Doctors warned that if it happened again, the consequences could be permanent organ damage or death. After that, Irwin Allen reluctantly allowed a small battery-powered fan to be installed inside the suit. But it was only a token solution. For the remainder of the series, Bob May was repeatedly ill from heat exposure. The robot could warn others of danger, but no one heard the distress signals coming from inside it. 6. A show that anticipated real Apollo program disasters. There are shows that when revisited only make us smile at their innocence. Lost in Space is different. The more you look at it from today's vantage point, the more chilling it becomes. In one early season episode, the spacecraft is crippled when an oxygen tank explodes, knocking out the entire system. In 1970, Apollo 13 suffered that exact disaster. In another episode, astronauts are stranded on a planet's surface, unable to return to orbit, a fear NASA genuinely faced during the Apollo 11 landing. Several episodes even depict guidance computer failures that send a ship drifting off course, an issue that haunted the Apollo program throughout its run. Of course, this wasn't prophecy. But the coincidences were close enough that some NASA engineers later admitted the scenarios in Lost in Space were frightening, precisely because they were so plausible. The show's scientific advisors understood very well that spaceflight was not a romantic dream, but a stack of risks piled on top of risks. While audiences laughed at the robot and Dr. Smith, the series quietly mapped out the ways humans could fail, and reality would later confirm it. 5. The original pilot, a dark drama that never aired. There is a version of Lost in Space audiences never saw. It exists in an original pilot titled No Place to Hide, and it contains no humour at all. In this version, Dr. Zachary Smith is a ruthless saboteur with no charm whatsoever. He dies in the very first episode. The robot is not comic relief, barely speaks, and functions as a cold, mechanical presence. The tone is heavy, tense, and claustrophobic, closer to a Cold War drama than a family show meant for daytime television. When CBS executives screened the pilot, the reaction was almost immediate. Too heavy? Not suitable for children. They didn't debate quality, they debated feeling, and that feeling in their view was unsafe. Irwin Allen was forced to compromise. He softened the tone and added elements that were easier to digest. What's telling, however, is that the first 13 episodes still retained the original soul. The danger was real. Decisions had consequences. Characters faced uncomfortable moral choices. Only afterward, when further network notes arrived, was Lost in Space truly bent out of shape. But for that brief window in the unaired pilot and the first 13 episodes, the show was what it was meant to be, a serious story about being lost not only in space, but in human belief itself. 4. Guy Williams, the lead who was pushed aside. When we first watch Lost in Space, we think we know who the main character is. The man at the centre of the frame, the one who makes the decisions, the father holding the family together. John Robinson looks like the core of the story, and Guy Williams played him believing that was his role. But when the show changed direction, that position began to slip away. John Robinson's screen time was gradually reduced. His dialogue thinned out. Key decisions were handed to Dr. Smith, the character played by Jonathan Harris, who increasingly dominated the spotlight. While Harris received florid dialogue and overwhelming screen presence, Williams slowly became the man standing beside him. Resentment built. Williams walked off, set multiple times went on strike, and confronted Irwin Allen directly. But the answer he received was always the same: I no longer have the authority. The show's direction now belonged entirely to CBS. By the third season, Williams no longer hid his disillusionment. He came to set, delivered his lines and left. No arguments, no resistance. Only the emptiness of an actor who knew that the series he believed in had taken a turn that no longer had a place for him. 3. Strong ratings yet still cancelled. There's a common belief about classic television: good shows survive, bad shows die. Lost in Space proves that belief wrong. Across all 3 seasons, the series consistently ranked in the top 25 most watched programs. No wild fluctuations, no sudden loss of relevance. In its 3rd season, especially Lost in Space reached a 21% audience share, meaning that out of every 5 televisions turned on, more than one was tuned to this show. For American television at the time, that was a powerful number. And yet, it was still cancelled. The reason had nothing to do with viewers. It was about spreadsheets. The per-episode budget had climbed to around $180,000, a large sum by late 1960s standards. CBS, in an effort to cut costs across the board, issued an ultimatum to renew the series, only if the budget could be reduced to $120,000 per episode. Irwin Allen refused. Not out of arrogance, but because he knew exactly what accepting would mean. No sets, no effects, no sense of adventure. Only the hollow shell of a show, drained of everything that made it alive. CBS didn't negotiate further. No gradual cuts, no experiments. They cancelled it outright. Lost in Space became one of the rare series killed, not because it failed, but because it was too expensive to keep alive. 2. The legal dispute over Angela Cartwright's schooling. While the network argued over money, another battle was unfolding quietly, one involving a child. Angela Cartwright, who played Penny Robinson, was a child actress. Under California labor law, she was required to receive a minimum of 3 hours of schooling every day during production. On paper, CBS agreed. In practice, Lost in Space's shooting schedule repeatedly violated the rule. At first, the violations were brushed aside. 1 hour missed, 1 session postponed, 1 exception, but it happened too often. Angela's parents began filing complaints. CBS responded in the usual way, paying fines. That worked until it didn't. The on-set teacher documented every violation and submitted the records to labor authorities. CBS now faced the possibility of criminal charges for willfully disregarding child labor protections. Only then was the production schedule adjusted. But the damage was already done. Delays, cost overruns, and yet another reason for the network to view Lost in Space as a liability. In this story, there's no clear villain, just a system that kept pushing limits until it hit something that couldn't be negotiated away. 1. A reunion script existed but was never filmed. Perhaps the most painful part of Lost in Space isn't that it was cancelled, but that it nearly had a chance to make things right. In the 1980s, Irwin Allen commissioned a reunion film script. The story was set 15 years later. The Robinson family still hadn't returned to Earth. The children had grown up with families of their own, and Dr. Smith supposedly reformed yet still selfish in that unmistakably Smith-like way. The original cast read the script and responded positively. CBS also showed interest in a television special. For the first time in years, Lost in Space had a real opportunity to receive a proper ending. Then Irwin Allen died in 1991. Without him, the project was immediately shelved. No one else had enough authority or enough motivation to carry it forward. The script circulated among fans like an unrealised legend. Some cast members later called it the ending we deserved. And so, Lost in Space ended exactly as its journey suggested. Never returning home, never closing its story, forever suspended among what might have been. A science fiction drama originally written to explore the fear of betrayal and how a system can collapse from a single crack within was ultimately lost by that very system. Twisted, redirected, stripped of the right to end. The Robinson family did return to Earth, but we were never allowed to see it. Dr. Smith was meant to die but survived to consume the entire show. A reunion script once existed, but no one remained with the power to bring it to life. And so, Lost in Space lived up to its title more than any other series lost in space, lost in human decisions, and lost from the very vision that gave birth to it. If Lost in Space was part of your childhood, leave a comment about the detail you remember most. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe to continue exploring the hidden stories behind television's golden age.